to this meeting of Cabinet on Thursday the 20th of February 2025. I'll take apologies for absence first, please.
Leader, I have no apologies.
Okay, thank you. We'll move then to disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest. Are there any interests to declare for today's meeting? Councillor Smith.
Item 19, member of the local authority, Governor Appointment Panel, I got dispensation to remain but not vote.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Item 19, I'm named in the report, so we'll leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other declarations for today? If not, we'll move to the minutes of the previous meetings on pages 1 to 4 of your agendas. I've had no requests for any amendments. I'm therefore happy to move them as a true record. Could I ask for a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Francis. Thank you. Could you all show if you're in favour of the minutes then, please? Thank you very much. We will agree those. We'll move then to announcements of Leader of the Council. I got one procedural announcement with regard to one of the items which will be withdrawn from today's agenda, and I'll just call in Debbie Smith, our legal officer, to give some further information.
Thank you, Leader. Just to confirm that agenda item number 16 is to be withdrawn. There are some procedural issues that need to be fully considered, so these need to be dealt with before the matter can proceed further. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you very much. So item 16 will be withdrawn for today. One further announcement I have is obviously this council, like many others across the UK, has continuously stated its support for Ukraine and for the people of Ukraine. We have many Ukrainian refugees residing in this city, and I think it's important, given the very ill-judged comments and very inaccurate comments made by President Trump in recent days, accusing Ukraine of starting the conflict when it's clear as a matter of record that Ukraine was invaded by Russia and many of its citizens killed as a result of that invasion, that we put on record that we reject entirely President Trump's version or trying to redraw of history, and that this council and this cabinet restates its position in support of Ukraine and for Ukraine to seek once again to be a fully free and independent nation. Again, I think on Sunday this week we will be lighting up the Guildhall in the colours of the Ukrainian flag, as we've done in previous years, and it's my intention to bring a motion to Council in due course for Council to be able to restate its support for the people of Ukraine. So I'll just place that on record for today as part of my announcements. We'll move now to public question time, please. I know we have received two public questions. The first one comes from Mr. Thraves. Mr. Thraves, if you'd like to come up and ask your question.
Morning, comrades. First of all, I'm Alex Thraves, representing Swansea Trades Council and Swansea Socialist Party. Before I ask my question, I just want to inform the Cabinet that Rob Stewart attended the Trades Council AGM last month. It was a very lively meeting, but we appreciate his attendance and the questions and the contributions that were put. So thanks for that, Rob. Comrades, my question is, the one-off 33 million of additional extra funding that's been received from central government is obviously a welcome step after 15 years of Condem and Tory government austerity cuts. That's definitely negatively impacted on local government jobs, services and facilities in Swansea and across Wales. However, despite Labour now in power at Swansea Council, at the Senedd and at Westminster, there will still be over 18 million of further proposed cuts placed on the residents and council workforce in Swansea over the next year, alongside what is now an above inflation council tax increase of 5.95%. The Commonwealth Swansea Council's budget report actually highlights the inadequate settlement for the next year and for the medium-term financial plan as well. Because despite an additional extra funding for 2025-26, there are still proposals to make more savings or cuts, as we pointedly say, and increased service charges in almost every department on the council. And following on from these proposed cuts next year, Swansea Council plan over the next 3 years, they've guesstimated another £115 million of cuts, where social services and education in particular, as the report says, faces real terms levels of reduction. The budget report grimly concludes that overall we can expect significantly reduced resources and will try and protect frontline services as far as possible. So my question to the Cabinet and to Swansea Council is, what has been the total amount of savings made by Swansea Council since 2010? And if, as the budget report dismally predicts, the outlook remains very challenging beyond 25-26, what steps will Swansea Labour Group take to control their own Labour governments in the Senedd and Westminster in order to recover the lost council revenues of the past 15 years and to secure the funding for future budgets that meet the needs of the residents of Swansea and council workers?
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Thraves. I'll come back to you in a second. Councillor Anthony, you've got your hand up. Did you need to come in at all, just before I answer?
It wasn't for this, it was for the previous one, so come back to me later, Rob, if you will, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Thraves, thank you very much for the question and for the opportunity to attend the Trades Council. I think we did have a good debate there, and I fully expected to see a similar sort of question that we've got today. Just to address the first point, because there are a couple of inaccuracies in the intro that I just want to correct, because the one-off of 33.4 million isn't a one-off. It's a revenue grant that we get, and that will reoccur every year unless the grant, of course, is reduced. But so that is money that goes into the base and reoccurs. So it's not a one-off sum. We would have been really disappointed if it was a one-off sum. Absolutely. In terms of the level of council tax that we are considering here today, we are striking a balance between the pressures that we have to invest in services that people rely on every day, and also making sure that the burden that falls on the local taxpayer isn't too much to bear. Now, within that 5.9 figure, we are obliged to raise money and provide money to the fire service, and we're not for a moment suggesting the fire service isn't worthy of investment, because they do a fantastic job. The issue we have is that money comes directly from the money that the council has to fund its services like education and social care. And we've long argued with Welsh Government that that levy should be turned into a precept like the police and raised separately, because it's a diversion of the money that we raise. So when you take that out, the actual council tax rise in Swansea this year will be nearly 1% lower. So it's around 5% that of the money that will go into services. And again, if you look at the other 21 authorities across Wales, we are well down the table, in the bottom half of the table in terms of level of council tax, and we are lower than the average for the actual cash amount raised by council tax as well. Indeed, look over the border to our neighbours in Neath Talbot, and their council tax is on average £200 a year higher than Swansea. If you look at Neath Talbot and Carmarthenshire as our two nearest neighbours, Neath Talbot proposing 7% this year, and Carmarthenshire proposing 9.7%. So I think against what others are proposing, this is a fair amount to request to the people of Swansea, and all of that money will be going into the core services that people are telling us in the consultation that we've undertaken that they would like to see. A record £584 million is proposed to be invested into services this year. That's about £5,400 per household going back into services. In terms of your question on savings, we can really only go back about 7 years, because that's what we hold. But if you go back to 2015-16 and you count up from then, the savings targets have been around 200 million. However, in reality, the savings achieved were 211 million. But instead of going down, the budget's actually increased by 229 million in real terms. And that's because every £1 of saving has produced £2 of additional money going in. And I think it's part of the discussion we had at the Trades Council about the dangers of looking at one side of a balance sheet, because there are always monies going in as well as monies going out. And that means, for instance, we have changed the way in which we invest, changed the way we deliver services, trying to deliver services, especially in social care, earlier to people to keep them healthier for longer, so that they don't need that more expensive care for as long later on. They may still get there, but it means that we are able to do more with the money we have. And again, if you want to compare budgets, the budget back in 2010 was 386 million versus the proposed 643 this year. So around 257 million pounds of growth in our budgets over the period, or a 2/3 increase. Turning to FTEs, because I think that's implied here. So what have we done in terms of jobs? The numbers of jobs have been relatively static over that period. We're pretty much where we were in 2010 before austerity was introduced. So we have done a really good job of protecting people's jobs and keeping people employed. In terms of our FTE headcount, as I explained during our discussion over at the Trades Council, some areas have seen some reductions as we've asked them to become more efficient or work in different ways, while others have seen investment and more staff added. For instance, back office staff, so this would be places like finance, etc., and corporate services. They've seen a 13% reduction, whereas social services workforce has grown by over 6%, and place-based services of over 4.5%. And to turn that into numbers, child and family services full-time equivalent levels have increased from 416 to 616 people delivering children's important services, and waste, parks and cleansing have increased from 398 to 453. And again, implied in here is again the potential for pressures on staff. And again, we've seen no evidence of a significant increase in sick levels or stress levels. So again, what we've tried to do is to keep the budget as high as it can be in terms of investment in services, ensuring that we protect jobs, especially in those critical areas that deliver services to the people of Swansea, but keep the costs to the taxpayer as low as possible over that period as well. So hopefully, Mr. Thraves, that's addressed all of your points, and I thank you very much for the question. Well, I know one of your colleagues has got a question as well, so I do want to get them in before the end of
exactly. You haven't really answered, Rob. Just 2 points I want to come back on. First of all, you accept in your report that the settlement is 50% less than you really need to run services properly in Swansea, and also the number of jobs remain the same as in 2010, but the demands are hugely greater than 2010, and you should have the number of staff able to meet those demands as well. And you never answered what's the Labour group going to do to try and get the money.
Yeah, apologies, Mr. Thraves. I did omit that bit of the question. Apologies for that. I will come back to that. So 2 things on that. We'll do as we have done this year. So you're absolutely right. As a local government in Wales, we campaigned for an increase of around 600 million. That is what we believed local government needed to meet all of the pressures across all of the 22 authorities. We ended up receiving 253 million, which was well short of what we believed we needed. However, Welsh Government did also make some changes towards the end of the year to address some of the in-year pressures we were carrying last year, which isn't accounted for in that figure. So there is more money in the system above that, but we didn't get what we asked for. That is absolutely clear. But I have to say, it's a dramatically different settlement from what we were facing just some months ago. So if we went back to the previous Tory government's proposals, we were looking at no extra cash. So we were looking at a real terms cut in budgets, and you would have seen, if that had come through and Welsh Government had not been able to help us as a local government, then you would have seen reports here today with hundreds of jobs being proposed to be cut. That is the difference that the Labour government's budget in London has made to Wales, giving it an extra 1.7 billion. And then because we've been able to successfully get a fair chunk of the Welsh Government budget into local government, that has enabled us to avoid those sorts of drastic cuts. But, you know, there would have potentially been cuts to schools, cuts to social care, cuts to libraries, cuts to refuse collection services. Such was the scale of what the Tory government was proposing before it was kicked out of office. It would have led to a really, really difficult situation across Wales. And I'm pretty sure there was been a very good chance that at least one council in Wales would have faced Section 114, given the financial challenges they were facing. So absolutely, we will continue to lobby Welsh Government hard, to lobby UK Government hard, even though we are part of the same party as the governments in power in those areas. The Labour government in London is not going to be able to overturn 14 years of neglect and underfunding in one budget. And I think that's the part we have to give them a bit of time to do. This is a really good start in terms of massively different funding compared to what we were expecting. I didn't expect the Labour government in one budget to fix every problem. But what we will continue to do is to lobby hard to Welsh Government and to UK Government. UK Government for a fair settlement for Wales and as much money coming to Wales as possible. And then from the Welsh Government, making sure as much of that money comes to local government as we possibly can. That's what this Labour group will do together with councils across Wales.
Good luck with that.
Thank you, Mr. Threaves. Okay, the next question we've got is from Mr. Mark Evans. Mr. Evans, you'd like to come up?
Thank you. My name's Mark Evans. I'm President of Swansea Trades Council, member of Unison and a member of the Swansea Socialist Party. We note in the so-called public consultation about what savings, we would describe them as cuts, the public wants, the Council once again uses smoke and mirrors to in effect hide the gravity of the cuts you are proposing to make in your next budget. Well, the Council are right to point out that there's been an increase in funding from a Starmer-led Labour government of 4.7%. And of course, any increase is welcome. But you seem more reticent to explain that this increase does not keep services functioning at their current heavily depleted levels, and certainly does not begin to replace Council funding lost since 2010. In other words, the increase in funding does not begin to meet the increased demand for services that we are seeing. We wonder if the Council has considered seriously the impact of making further devastating cuts will have in your workforce. Well, it was claimed by Rob Stewart at Swansea Trades Council that the workforce has not been reduced since 2010. This avoids addressing the demand for services has significantly increased since that time. And therefore, council employees, like another councils, have been expected to work harder for less, as on average, council employees' pay in real terms has reduced in value by around 25% since 2010. You will remember it was council workers who kept vital council services functioning during the pandemic, at great risk to themselves and their families. And what is their reward? The Council is proposing to implement further cuts and increased charges passed on by a Labour government in the Senedd, acting as a transmission belt for Labour Westminster cuts. As a result of the pressure and stress on your workforce due to implementing cuts, sickness levels are high, and around 50% of sickness absence is attributable to stress. And much of this is related to having to work harder as staff are not replaced when they leave, etc. Isn't it about time the Council put its employees and the public first by refusing to impose further cuts and implement a legal, needs-led no-cuts budget as part of a mass campaign with the trade unions and the public to force the Welsh Labour Government to fully fund the Council?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I think always the risk of having a second question when part of it's been answered in the first, but I'll do my best to cover the points that you've raised again. And again, thank you for the chance to have the conversation at the Trades Council. In terms of the underlying points that are raised here is that we aren't putting our staff first. That is something that we chose to do. Our first year of office, actually, we decided to deal with a long running pay and grading review. we decided to implement that. I believe one of the first things we did. We also became a real living wage employer to make sure that the lowest paid workers in our authority got the wages that we believed they deserved above the then proposed minimum wage by the UK Tory and coalition governments. So those are some of the first actions we've taken. But since then, in every budget that we've set, we have attempted, working closely with our trade union colleagues, to protect jobs wherever possible. So it's always been a case of trying to redeploy people into other areas of the council if a post becomes one that is at risk. And we've been hugely successful in that, potentially avoiding compulsory redundancies year on year. There have been occasions where we haven't been able to place people, but by and large, we have avoided compulsory redundancies. Again, this year, only 11.5 posts are at risk out of the whole 12,500 people we employ. And that, I think, is a real achievement in terms of the changes that we have. But again, the numbers don't support the position that you're laying out, because whilst there are £18 million worth of churn in there, and I would say that's churn, some of it is increased charges, some of it is efficiencies, getting better deals on contracts, etc. And some of it is changes to the way in which we deliver services. But overall, there is 70 million quid's worth of new cash going into this authority. So you have 70 million going in, 18 million pounds worth of changes, pressures, etc. That gives you a net increase of 52 million pounds going into this budget. So it is what you've asked. It is a budget that gives more than it takes out. It is doing the lawful way of achieving a no cuts budget, if you want to term it that way, because the reality is Mr. Smith and treasurers like Mr. Smith around the country would not permit us, quite rightly under the law, to set a budget that did not balance, to set an unlawful budget. That is something, and I think we had this discussion again at the Trades Council, we cannot set an unlawful budget. So whatever we do here, we have to make sure is balanced and therefore can be signed off by the Section 151 officer. But the reality is, it is a record sum being spent on services this year, £584 million, an increase in one single year of £52 million. And, you know, that is because we have a really good settlement from the UK government to Wales, which has been passed on by the Welsh government in the Senedd. Now, as I said, compare that to what we were facing back before the Tory government was kicked out in London, and it would have been a very different story. And you probably legitimately would have turned up and asked us why we were having to make so many cuts. And I would have told you it's because of the way in which we've been denied money in Wales and denied money in Swansea. That has not been the case this year. There are still pressures, as there will always be. There are always new pressures that come, but it is not about asking people to do more every year. It's about asking people to work smarter, to invest in technology. One of the other things we chose to do as an administration was to insource control of our own IT services so that we could invest in them directly. Previously, those jobs had been exported to Scotland under a contract, where we were reliant on a big multinational for support on our IT. That was a political decision and a strategic decision to bring jobs back into this authority so that we could invest in our IT ourselves. And that team is working brilliantly in terms of helping us to bring on new programs, new projects, and to give our staff the best technology that they can have to do their jobs. So I think the premise is not correct on this one, and it's not only borne out by the fact that we have the budget that's being proposed today with the investment going in, but also the staff numbers have remained static despite us being able to absorb pressures, and the fact that we have not seen a massive spike in sickness levels. Sickness levels, again, have remained pretty static in the organisation over the period. So, again, none of the indicators that you would expect to see go that way or that way have changed in the way that you would expect if what you're saying was true. So, again, we haven't got all of the money we asked for off the government, but as I said to Mr. Thraves in my answer to his question, I didn't expect any government to fix 14 years of neglect in 1 year. but we will continue to lobby because we do expect a good settlement again next year and the year after and the year after, and that is what we'll be lobbying for. And I do hope members of the Trades Council will join us in lobbying governments for more money for Swansea. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we'll now move on to councillor question time. Are there any councillors present who wish to ask questions on the budget? Councillor Philpott.
Morning all. My question is on agenda item 14. It's the Sustainable Communities for Learning. When you look at page 184, and it's paragraph 2.3 and 2.4 in particular, when I read through the report, I expected to see an appendix outlining which schools had actually got to the point of that were ready to start pending for funding were prioritised. So this is the schools that already had all their works and just waiting for the funding to come through or be guaranteed. But there is no report on there. There's no appendix to outline which schools are going to benefit and by how much. So that's the first question. Was the appendix missed off so that we all know which schools will be having the benefit of that funding? And the second question is, if we don't know, do the schools know? Because I think it's really important that if there is funding to be available for capital works, and I know a lot of the schools, for many reasons, are, you know, they do have repairs needed.
Sorry. Do you want to come? Apologies.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'll come back to you in terms of the exact list, but what I would say is that this is additional money that was announced in January, and I was going to pay tribute to the dexterity of our officers in being able to turn around a programme that spends this money by the 31st of March as required, even though schools are only shut for 1 week in the period between the time when the money was announced and the 31st of March. Now, this work I know is ongoing. I've seen drafts already, but as soon as the list is finalised, then I'll be happy to share it with you, Councillor Philpott.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Councillor Philpott, in terms of the way this works with end-of-year money like this, because of the need to get it spent, it is invested primarily into existing schemes, and then that replaces funding that then gets flipped into new schools, which will form in a different report, which will appear before Cabinet in due course. So it's at the moment, that list hasn't been finalised because all we're doing is pushing additional money that's arrived into the existing schemes and then moving money on so that we don't lose it. No, Councillor Philpott, if you want to come back in, yeah.
Yeah, I understand, and I know that many departments do get money towards the end of the financial year, and I think they all have lists of things that they can proceed with. But this, you know, this actually says that the additional funding of 1.742 million was awarded in July 2024, and so so a number of schemes had they were all ready to go pending the funding. So if they were all ready to go, that means that somebody knew what that list was. So that's my point, is that because they were pending, just waiting for the funding to come through, that it should have been able to be in the report. That's the...
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Philpott, there are several elements that Mr. Smith into.
Yes, to some extent, this is because it's a conveyor belt. We have got very used to what I refer to as end of year flipperoo money. So the normal parameters are we get to a point at the beginning of March where we set a budget at council. Invariably, then in either March or April, you get the detailed report to Cabinet on what's being allocated in the current year. You tend to get an in-year allocation. This is an end of year top up, which means it's existing stuff that was already approved in the previous cycle for the flipperoo, as it were, which I know you've understood. So the reality is what it does is it displaces stuff that's already happened. We're not going to spend it all by the end of March. Otherwise, it displaces stuff that's happened. That is then carried forward and you'll receive a new report. Ordinarily, reports on the allocation of building maintenance, highways maintenance, etc., and the schemes that go with it come through either in March cabinet or occasionally April's cabinet. So these are schemes that have already happened. So there is no appendix missing on this one. Schemes that have happened last year, and it's because almost every year we've got used to get to March, there's a bit more money, and then you roll it over and you do the same again. And there is a mismatch. So you would expect a report in due course in either 20th of March cabinet or April's, indicating that the bonus of the rollover plus the allocation and the list of the specific schemes, which is what Councillor Smith has been referring to. So that's why it works that way. It's because almost every year you can anticipate the same again. You would expect in a year's time to be in the same position. Hopefully there'll be some spare money. It'll be rolled over, badged, flipped, and the same will happen again. So I think you'll see the list in either 20th of March or it'll be April, depending on how quick we're ready to go.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just to put it in plain terms, what happened this year was that at the end of July, we were given an allocation and a second allocation and then a third allocation in January. Well, of course, they came in practically on the last day of term. And the best time to undertake any work in a school is over the summer holidays. So, of course, that was that opportunity was lost. So we've been playing catch up since, and I think, as I said, it is a tribute to our officers that they've been able to get the schemes ready the way they have done. The issue here is when the announcement is made by Welsh Government about money coming our way. Now, although the money is welcome, the way of doing it has been raised because, you know, this doesn't allow effective planning in any local authority, and I think that's something that's a message that's gone back to them.
So the second part of the question was, do the schools know that they will be benefiting? You know, has there been a dialogue with the schools to say, if we get this extra money, we know this is what you're asking for, this is what you need. And if we get the money, then yes, we will be able to proceed. Because again, it isn't just internal planning for the council, it's planning for the particular schools as well, particularly when they have, you know, a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. I understand that, Councillor Philpott, and I think the answer you're going to get is yes. The point being is that I think we are trying our best to shoehorn money that arrives very late into a programme that's already being delivered. Okay, so the schools already know because the work's already being done. Right. The fact is, we're getting the money after the work. Right. What it then does is create us a new list, which we can then move that money on to do more, and that's where the conversations with those schools then have taken place because they know what is then coming. So it is that conveyor belt that Mr. Smith alluded to. But we got luckily to have the director with us today. So Helen Morgan-Rees, if you want to add.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the existing schemes, obviously we've done our internal planning, but we've also had recent conversations with schools in anticipation of further late monies arriving. And I think having that back pocket mentality where we've got schemes that we can bring on board at late notice is something that we would want to ensure that schools are aware of, and we've made them aware of in a recent meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other councillor questions? Okay, that closes councillor question time then, and we'll move on to pre-decision scrutiny. I welcome Councillor Chris Holly as the chair of the scrutiny committee. Chris.
Thank you very much, Leader, and thank Cabinet for the opportunity to do this. I think the first thing I have to say is, as I've said in years past, is this is not a political statement. This is a feedback from the scrutiny boards as a critical friend. But there is, I have to say, an issue about that. We did have a meeting prior to the Cabinet, the budget going out for consultation, where a number of questions were asked, a number of issues about the savings that were put in, and we still have not had a reply from that. And that was back in January. So really, what I'm saying is that, you know, this is, we were fully aware that there is going to be changes to the Welsh Government budget that probably will be announced this afternoon. So there are two things about this, what we're feedback on now. One is feeding back on the fact that we didn't have the questions that were asked at scrutiny replied to for the meeting that we had this week, and also the fact that there will be changes to local government finance and other finances from the Welsh Government. That being said, obviously there have been a number of panel meetings, and the first one I won't read all these reports because we'll be here until midday. But what I will highlight is the education one first. It said about welcome the budget increase. Very uncertain about the national insurance costs, how that will happen, but that's a theme that runs through all the scrutiny panels, both education and social services, plus the finance one, where this uncertainty about what is going to be given to local authorities to pay for third-party increases is a very important issue. The funding via grants, again, concerned because nobody knows really what the grants are, and it is a difficult one for us all to understand, and we understand the Cabinet's issues there. And the school budget concern forum, the concerns they had really were particularly concerns within statutory education services, including ALN. I think that one is one that we need to look at in the future. Because ALN is relatively new. The way in which it's going to be funded it's going to be a stretch on the schools. So I think that's one that we will have to come back with. And meeting those needs is going to be quite a problem for many schools. And I think we will be seeing issues with certain schools on that. Staffing implications, again, we come back to, we don't know what's happening with the third parties. We don't know what's going to happen with the staffing, in as much as what we have very little control as a council over what schools and delegated budgets do. So there's that concern. And the one that was noted by them was the home to school transport, and how that funding for that has been transferred to the Place Directive, and there was a concern for that. Moving on to the social services panel, welcome the budget increase, very much welcome the budget increase, and we all know the social services, because its very nature is a demand-led function. We cannot determine who's going to be available or who's going to need social services. That is done outside our control, and as such it's a demand issue. Transparency of what is happening within the social services function is one that was of concern to the panel, and it is now going to be addressed in a way that we are comfortable about it. Level support for people, we were concerned about that. The director did confirm that, there is an issue and one which will be looked at in the future about how that service is delivered, and there was some confidence with the director's comments. Increase in living wage and national insurance, as I said earlier on, there is concern right across the scrutiny function about what will happen on national insurances. The preventive agenda, again, an issue which all of us must pay attention to, because we all understand that the health service, our National Health Service, is under enormous pressure. But a lot of those pressures are because we aren't having the ability to stop people going in to hospital or in their care. But on top of that, home adaptations are taking a considerable amount of time, and we need to think about how we can improve that efficiency so that we have got packages of care ready and available for people to come out of the hospital function. Reducing external foster care was one that we were really concerned about, and how that was going to play out, and how we as a council would increase the amount of foster care. there is some issues around that, and one which I think the scrutiny board will again look at, because it's whilst we understand the function and understand the reasoning behind it, there are some issues about the Welsh Government's position about non-profit making organisations making money out of social services, especially foster care, and we understand that, and to some extent fully appreciate that fact that it is difficult for organisations, and it's difficult for us as a council to accept that people are going to make considerable amounts of money out of fostering children when it is a function that should solely be in social services. We understand that. On the meeting, the finance function and the finance and the performance function, again, further settlements. We understand what the Welsh Government are saying. We understand what Section 151 office is saying, and we understand what has been coming out of the settlement. And it is quite worrying that we don't know exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, this particular budget will be changed afternoon today, apparently. Again, national insurance, again, everybody was concerned about that. We recognise the challenge about capital finance and the way in which the finance of capital is likely to go in the future because interest rates will be going up. There is an issue, and I must say, and this is on a number of issues within the budget, about confidentiality. We are putting figures into our budgets, which are in the public domain, but those figures are covered by confidentiality of what's going to happen with those particular figures. And I think, and I've asked the leader for her a construction, a conversation amongst us all about how we can get away with it, wrong thing, how we can get over this particular issue, because it is public money and we invest in public money and we're putting it in the public domain, but we are taking time, and it is time, to find out what that public money is going to be used for. And the highlight was Skyline and also St Helens. The equalisation reserve, we note that point, and general environment schemes. I think, Chair, Leader, I don't think there's anything else really that I could say. I think I've covered everything that was concerned by the scrutiny board. I would say that we would like some answers, but I think those answers will come after the budget meeting in March. But thank you very much for the opportunity to address Cabinet on those items.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Holly, and thank you for the work that your committee and the other committees have done in terms of the specific scrutiny on the budget. There's a heck of a lot you went through there at quite a high level. I'm assuming that there will be letters coming in due course with more detail in them, which obviously look to respond to. And just on the point about not having the answers, again, it's something Mr. Smith and I apologised for at the scrutiny board. As you'll be aware, some of those questions had to go into multiple departments, and it's been a piece of work to get them to get the full answers together. Either way, they should have been provided by the time the committee met. So again, apologies for that. You will get those answers in due course. And again, it's something that I have asked that we do not repeat in terms of not having a set of questions in readiness for a committee. So that's one thing. But I'll bring Mr. Smith in if he wants to add.
Yes, I'd indicated and personally apologised to Councillor Holly. Technically, they're not late, but that's a bit of a smarmy answer because the committee set a deadline of the 20th, which is today. I do have a draft in front of me, but I'm sat in this meeting, so I haven't yet cleared it. But I do take entirely the point, as does the leader, that it is less than helpful to have not had the answers before either the scrutiny meeting on Monday, Tuesday, I'm losing track of the week, and certainly before today. So I do anticipate that the leader will be sending that out today, meeting technically the deadline, but the point is well made, and we accept, unfortunately, that it is very regrettable. And you're right, as a result of the scrutiny panels and the meeting on Tuesday, I am in receipt of the letter. I know there's only one specific follow-up question, but there are some other matters we will want to talk about in our response, and that is due on the 12th of March after the budget is set. But you equally have my apologies. I did try to to push colleagues as fast as they could, but collectively, regrettably, I couldn't get it across the line in time to be more helpful than I would have wished to have been if I got that in the right order too.
Okay, thank you both. I understand that. It's just a question of timing, and I know that we're under pressure from UK government, Welsh government, because of when the budgets are actually come forward in December. So it is a matter of time. But thank you anyway, and I look forward to those replies.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Holly. And just on the couple of final points you made at the end there. One, absolutely agree with you. It's the point we've made to Welsh Government on NI. We do need to have a high level of assurance as to what will be covered and what will be compensated for. We have had an indication, a strong indication from the Welsh Government about what level that's likely to be. But until it's confirmed, it ain't confirmed. So there is a healthy degree of uncertainty remains. Again, we're pushing hard for that to be made clear as quickly as possible. Do expect, as you said, some significant changes, I think, in the Welsh Government's budget today, given that they are having to negotiate with other parties to get the budget through the Senate. So there are bound to be new things announced this afternoon. And again, Councillor Holly, I had, as at previous years' exchange, hoped to bring as much as I could to this meeting with a level of stability, but inevitably now there will be changes between now and when we meet as a council to discuss the budget. So again, I will apologise for that, but it's not my fault on this occasion.
I have to say, Leader, I accept that because it isn't your fault this time. For the amount that might change from the Welsh Government. Whatever else might change will be your fault. Well, and we'll see what happens then.
I'm sure if those things are positive changes, I'm sure the people of Swansea will be most happy about them.
I'll take that on advisement.
The one other point on a more serious note is, do understand the point about the capital programme and the difficulties of discussing things that remain commercially confidential. And again, I think we've just got to be clear for people who may be viewing this debate. We do not keep things in the private domain for no reason. They have to pass a test. We take them only in private session where they pass that test. And generally, those are to protect the interests of the taxpayer so that we do not end up giving away our commercially secure position when in negotiations with contractors and others. So there are very good reasons why there are elements of those reports that we would not want to be in the public domain. But of course, all councillors get to see those reports. So it's not as if the councillors themselves do not know the information, because those are shared. So it doesn't impinge on people's ability to ask questions on those reports. And we do go into private session quite regularly in order to do that. What I have done is to ask the Chief Executive and the Legal Officer if we can look at, is there a better way of presenting that report so as much as possible can be in the public domain while still maintaining the council's commercial position and protecting that for the taxpayer.
I totally agree with you, and I think that discussion needs to be had. What needs to be had around that discussion is what is commercially sensitive and what isn't. Is, you know, the actual build or the changing or the transformation isn't, but the actual, you know, whatever, if we are bidding for something or somebody's bidding for a contract, then I can understand that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, sorry.
As a final point of clarification, because I've equally been party to the discussion and debate, yes, individual schemes and some of it will be individually commercially sensitive in terms of funding packages. They will also be sensitive at the point at which negotiations are still going on with contractors. But as I explained to the panel, equally, you are now in the position where you're having to set a budget, including a capital budget, against which this council would be monitored. So I've tried to strike a balance between protecting what's on yellow exempt papers, but clearly I can't have here be dragons on individual budget items when a budget is set. So it's perhaps unfortunate that there are a very large number of them. Could see it either way. That's partly because of the sheer scale of our capital programme and the ambition that the administration has, but it does mean there are a very large number of them that throughout the year were exempt for various reasons as certified by the monitoring officer, but by definition have to be in the budget. Otherwise I'm setting a budget with hundreds of millions not actually in the budget. And as I somewhat colloquially referred to, I work for Swansea Council, not MI5, and I think it was taken in the appropriate jest to which it was intended. But there's a serious point behind it, which I do understand, Councillor Holly.
I'm not sure that point has been proven beyond doubt yet, Mr. Smith, but we'll take your word for it.
You suggesting I protested too much?
Okay, no, thank you all very much for that, and thank you to both the public for their questions and for the councillors and the scrutiny chair for the feedback today. Much appreciated. We'll move now on to the reports on the agenda. First one is the Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report, third quarter. Mr. Smith.
Be very brief on this one. I always say I'm going to be very brief and then talk the hind legs off a donkey. 4 recommendations in front of you. This is current year, almost backward looking, but also anticipating to, there's only 6 weeks to go to the end of the year. There should be no surprises in here in terms of what advice I gave at the second quarter. Very, very briefly, draw your attention to the table in 2.3. Disappointingly, it is my job to be disappointed as a treasurer, as you know. I am disappointed that services are still £14 million forecast overspend for the year. And I continue to say to colleagues and cabinet members must try harder, but that is my job. That's not to denigrate the demand, the demography, the price pressures and the hard work that is done by colleagues. I do hope that several million will be trimmed off that by outturn, but it clearly ain't going to likely go below £10 million, which is a problem in the current year. The important takeaway is what's in the director's comments about their recovery plans, which have been accepted by the Chief Exec and myself, and the structural deficits, which have also been accepted and then built into next year's budget. That's the main reason for the budget monitoring being particularly important in terms of that item. Having started with that tone of misery, section 3.2 sets out the contingency fund and makes clear that it is fully spent at this point in time in the year, but some of them are offers of underwrite by myself waiting for lastminute.com mattress money from Welsh Government potentially, which might be announced as soon as this afternoon. So although it is all technically committed, there may be some balance to get to the year end, roll over and bolster your in-year position for next year, just like what happened in the previous year. So that's an important one to be aware of. Section 4.3, we had a large central inflation provision. We were very prudent in setting the budget for 24-25. That remains unallocated at third quarter, useful to put into the mix. And the important one is the table in section 6.1, which, yes, does recognise those service overspends, but also recognises the tolerances you agreed to allow for social care in place in year, throws everything into the mix. And because of that last minute, but very, very helpful one-off money from Welsh Government, recognising the real pressures that local government was under, moves it to an underspend of £2.5 million on revenue alone. Also in the report, you've got a guaranteed minimum now from me of at least a £10 million underspend on capital financing, which in line with council policy will wash through to capital equalisation reserve and help provide for flexibility. So at third quarter overall, you are guaranteed to underspend. Services are guaranteed to overspend. Capital financing is guaranteed to significantly underspend. It's an improvement on the second quarter position, but some of those structural issues remain, and I will continue to tell people off, as is my job, to try and get them to live within budget, but that I do recognise the real pressures. The rest of the report is really straightforward, and I go back to yourself with the 4 recommendations in front of you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I've got very little to add to what you said. As you say, it's a slightly improved position, but it's not going to get us back to balance. However, there are other measures that will help us at outturn to be in a much more positive position, we believe. In terms of the cabinet members and directors, can I thank you for the work that's being done on the recovery plans? Again, that is making a difference, especially in place and social services, where those 2 biggest pressures lie. And again, that work must continue, even if we get to end of year and we're in a surplus position. So we must continue to do everything we can to make sure we have a stable position for our services in terms of the financial support. So again, thank you for the work. It's an improved position, but still leaves us with some major structural issues that we will have to resolve. And part of that will be hopefully addressed in the budget that we bring forward shortly. So I'm happy to move the 4 recommendations on page 5. Could I ask for a seconder, please? Thank you.
Have a second.
Okay, any comments or questions to Mr. Smith or myself on this report? No. Okay, could I ask you all then to show if you're in favour of the report, please? Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that is carried. Councillor Anthony, apologies, I did mean to call you back in, but your hand had gone down. Sorry, did you want to come in?
It keeps going up and down my hand, and I'm not sure if anyone can see it. I just wanted to, I don't even know if I have to declare, but on the governors on item 19, I have a governor on one of those schools, but I thought I'd better just double check.
Okay. Personal interest only,
Okay,
Councillor Anthony.
cheers.
Okay, we'll go then to the first of our budget reports for today, and this is the medium financial plan 26 to 29. Mr. Smith.
So again, I will be brief on this one because before it's written, it will change, not so much as a result of what may be announced by Welsh Government later today, but what is going to be the outcome of the comprehensive spending review, which is due to report in June. I otherwise fall into the real risk of turning into a Two Ronnie sketch and attempting to answer the question for the previous question before it's even been answered. The assumptions set out in the medium-term financial plan are reasonable on the basis of my technical advice. They come with caveats and warnings. They make assumptions over inflation. Inflation, as you are aware, has gone higher. Bank of England thinks it will drift back down. It makes heroic assumptions on base rates and bond yields coming down significantly to do the externalised debt. Bank of England thinks they will come down. Whether they'll come down to that strike rate of 3.5%, slightly more debatable. It also makes an assumption of growth of not exactly huge amounts over the MTFP. I've allowed for 1%, 2% and 3% of growth over the period. You're well aware growth is currently anemic and it is a concern to the UK government. But until we get to the spending review, we don't know what the parameters are going to be. Every authority is in that same position of awaiting the spending review and what are protected departments and what are not. And there's been a lot on the national media about that. The only item I draw your attention to, which is unique to Swansea, you're aware of our unique capital borrowing strategy, having locked in long, low, and a deferral strategy to wait for rates to come down. That remains the case, but because rates are proving a bit sticky, it's all pushed to the end of the medium-term financial plan. That's not deliberately kicking the can down the road to be someone else's problem. It's done logically, because some of the spending will be done in later years, which is so you match the liabilities to who benefits. But more importantly, why would you borrow today from the PWLB at 6%? I remind you, I borrowed at 1 point something when market commentators expect it to be between 4 and 4.5% in 2 or 3 years' time. So as long as I've got enough cash and resource cover to get you through as a council, it would be perfectly reasonable for me to give you officer advice that says these are reasonable assumptions, and I'm not intending updating these ones, even if there are announcements this afternoon. They're at the margin, the much bigger ones, so I'm not proposing to make any changes to this one when it goes through to council, if you're content to take my advice today and recommend it to council. There's only the one recommendation. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. And yes, I'm sure Cabinet will heed your advice again on this report. As you say, it's a bit of crystal ball gazing into the future. Lots could change as it always does then. But again, pity the members of the public weren't able to stay for this item. But again, it demonstrates the potential for significant investment again over a number of years, which I think often when certainly the members of the Trades Council have turned up, they see that as a series of cuts that we intend to make in future years. It isn't. It's a series of investments. So again, it's reading the book the wrong way round. So again, hopefully they will understand that from the discussion we've had today. But again, thank you for the work on this, Mr. Smith, and happy to move the recommendation on page 25.
Happy to second, Leader.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on the MTFP for Mr. Smith or myself? No, don't see any hands. Could I ask you all then if you're in favour of the recommendation on page 25? Thank you very much. That is carried. We move now then to revenue budget 25-26. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Leader. I'll spend a little bit longer on this one because this is probably the main course. 3 recommendations in front of you once I've given my technical advice, setting out a whole raft of assumptions in the report. As you've already indicated, the bit in 1.6 highlighted in bold, net over £50 million going into services, irrespective of the amount that's proposed to be savings from schools and non-schools budgets, over £50 million. Before I get into the detail, just take a step back. Like for like, settlement increase 20-something million, cash for cash 30-something million. You are putting, if you agree this and recommend to council and council then approves it, £50 million into services, substantially more than you are getting, and you are taking an approach which is a judicious use of reserves, subject to the comments I'm going to make, and striking that balance which you've already referred to. I won't repeat what you've already said because I think you've eloquently covered it from a political angle, and I would have said the same in an apolitical way as an officer in terms of striking that balance. So the report is driven by the settlement that we know at the moment, and as you equally alluded to, what we don't know officially, we don't know until we don't know. I'm only going to draw attention to the main points because to some extent I've changed little since the provisional settlement because officially nothing's happened. It's all chatter in the media says until it happens. We don't know. Due to an unfortunate conflagration of timing, it will be this afternoon that we will know some final settlement figures. But that first table in 4.6 makes clear the point you've already made. It's £52 million net into services. So the focus can be on £18 million worth of savings, but it's 70 in 18 and still a net £52 million add, which is way more than you've got in settlement. And I think you should be commended for that in terms of your prioritisation. Section 4 sets out the school's prioritisation and does two things, as you're well aware. It not only now baselines the one-off emergency action that we took last year, but it puts a substantial cash increase on top. It is interesting. Many of the other authorities around us that are considering council tax rises of nearly double the amount are frankly looking like it's because they've got no schools balances left. They didn't intervene in the current year. You chose to do so as an administration, as did council. And that has enabled you to be able to stave off some of the difficulties. Schools, as a result of the settlement, are now able not only to just assume that the money was coming one-off, but to have it in the base, £11 million, and the same again for good measure on top. It's not going to solve all their ills. That is why there's still a savings ask of schools, as there is of the council as a whole, but net, they are going up. Capital financing, I've taken an officer decision to reduce capital financing charges for budget as set, as you're well aware, for several years because of the strategy of borrow low, fix, and able to temporarily lend it out at a higher rate until the cash is spent. You are making in-year significant gains. It seems absurd to me to not bank some of that. It must only be temporary because you do expect to spend it all eventually. It seems absurd to set a budget forcing if I didn't put these items in, you'd have to cut something else. Why would you cut it when you're almost guaranteed to make several £1 million in treasury management operations for the next 3 or 4 years? So I've banked a bit of it in the budget. You should therefore not expect there to be so much windfall on budget monitoring in year, but hey, who knows on rates and slippage and everything else. I always say that and I always end up going, ta-da, it's got better than you expected because I note the wry smiles, but it's on the basis of what it is in terms of why I've reduced it. There is going to be a requirement to externalise additional debt. You know the strategy of deferring till the best possible time, and that will come in due course. The Fire Authority and other levies are in. I hope you will indulge me. There are 3 levies. Those 3 levying bodies all have unlimited levying powers. I will be careful what I say because I mustn't tread into the politics and the worthiness of each of them, but it is interesting that one has chosen to freeze its levy, one, which I'm slightly biased on, I must admit, significantly reduce its levy, and one significantly increase its levy. And that you've made the point that this is an unlimited levy on yourselves and does soak up council taxpayers' money ultimately without me making any judgment on the relative value of them. But I thought you'd forgive me that one. I'm a bit smug about one of them and I am slightly biased. The council tax reduction scheme makes arrangements for making sure that the poorest in society get support. In terms of council tax, because it is quite a challenging bill when it lands on the doormat, when everything is added up. And as you said, we will be below average. We are below average. The increase is certainly likely, well, the increase will be below average, may even be bottom quartile again, depending on what other authorities do as they react to any additional money that comes today. The rest of the report is as set out. The January proposals recommended £18.474 million worth of savings. These still do. What has changed is some wiggle room in terms of what's been put in. The budget consultation was still open at the time of writing this report, but will be finalised, but I do not anticipate any major changes. Section 6.4 sets out the full range of amendments that I've given officer advice that you should be able to move today to council. £6 million more into services than you were planning in January. I am reducing the central inflation provision, yes, taking those gains from 2 of the levying bodies, having to fund an additional increase in a levying body, and that's going to go up again. I have been notified it will go up by another £26,000. In a normal year, I would have updated you now so that you could move it and have it all tied up ready for council. But frankly, given that we're waiting for a whole raft of things later today, I think I may as well just do them all in one go. But you can see where it's gone overall in terms of the assumptions and still continuing to balance the budget. You are, as normal, inviting as to whether you want to make any further amendments today, but I shall come on to my advice in a moment. You've covered staffing implications and the minimisation of issues and risks there. The bit I'll spend a tiny bit more time on is my assessment of reserves. We run a deliberate strategy of low general reserves, high earmarked reserves. Because the budget has gone up 50 million, technically general reserves are now below 2%. There's no official rule as to what the figure should be, but below 2% starts looking a little bit risky. And as I've set out in the report, at some point you'll need to consider topping them up. But it's never a good look to set council tax rises higher to top up a general reserve. But I'm giving clear advice that ultimately there's no spare there. And at some point it will need to be topped up. If the budget grows by £50 million a pop, you should be probably adding £1 million a year to general reserves. But I understand entirely why you're not at this point in time. And I remind you that last year, because we had a good outturn, that was the point at which you decided to add to reserves. And that seems to be a more appropriate way to do it. Contingency fund I've reduced down, but is still adequate for my purposes in terms of technical advice. Still over 3 million in there. Still an element in central inflation. I am required to consider other matters. I reviewed the insurance fund and agreed to release £6 million, which you've set out for 2 lots of £3 million worth of revenue contributions. There is a complication, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is the local government borrowing initiative, which will come up later when I give some technical advice on what you can and can't move today. In terms of my assessment advice, I'll draw your attention to the overall position, which is a recommendation of a 5.95% increase in council tax, including the additional levy for the fire authority. It's the assessment of risks and uncertainties. It's the two that I draw attention to, particularly peppered throughout the report. I am not best pleased about the position I'm in, nor is any other treasurer, about having no idea whatsoever until possibly June as to what the national insurance compensation is for this council, for the fire authority, because bizarrely I have to be compensated for the fire authority. What might be done or not done in any announcement later today in terms of compensation for providers and social care, and lots that are mentioned in the media, but as far as I'm concerned, that's speculation at the moment. But that NI uncertainty is really, really unfortunate for everyone. And so I have modified my Section 25 assurance. That's a certification from me that the budgets are reasonable and adequate based on what information I have in front of me. Well, I don't have the information in front of me, so it's perfectly reasonable for me to have a little hissy fit on that one and say, don't know. And many other authorities may do the same. Once we have some certainty on that, that one is likely to reduce, but it may not go away entirely. There are real risks to that national insurance being inflationary generally, and to providers in particular in social care, which does worry me and does worry the Director of Social Services. The other one is my qualification in terms of the use of the capital equalisation reserve. I've drawn attention and it came up in scrutiny. You have always previously used it only to smooth capital financing costs. At the moment, you have taken some of that to smooth the revenue budget directly, which is a difference, but you've done it when you've been striking a balance to get to a level of council tax that you feel is reasonable and balances the needs of spending on services. So I do have to give you both of those assurances, modifications, and I will continue to do so at council. But when I look at it overall, the proposed level of draw from reserves and everything else, whilst I'm putting both those qualifications in, they are for a reason and effect because I'm obliged to, but it does not change my overall position that with all the balances, risks and uncertainties, it is reasonable to propose what is there. So in terms of technical, final bit of advice for me before you decide, here is my official technical advice. On the basis of what I know today, you are at the limits of affordability of moving anything. That is the reason why I've put those Section 25 modifications in around you drawing from reserves for a different purpose. So I can envisage a scenario that we're going to get a settlement later today, and there are likely to be changes, likely to be beneficial changes. So I'll be looking for you to, if you're content when you discuss it, to make 3 changes to the recommendations or make clear in terms of delegated advice. I always modify for any last minute changes to the minor things. That includes the fire levy of £26,000. If there are any other changes to tax-based precepts from minor bodies, etc., that's normal. Those should be thousands or tens of thousands. There may be some technical announcements later on this afternoon where if it's a specific offer of money for a specific thing, I don't know, so this is just hypothetical, but if part of the settlement is there's more money and it must be given to schools or to social care or the convention is it's passported through. If there's any clear passporting obligations, I would anticipate doing those under technical delegation and reflecting them in the final report that goes through to council after Cabinet has finished today. I'll come back to the final lappy one in a moment. The third element of that is there may, given the quantum that is being talked about in the media, be a sufficient significant other sum for there to be a policy decision to be made. And given there isn't another cabinet, that is likely to need to be moved at council by the ruling administration. There'll be debate by others as to what that money may be used for. I've mentioned several times this local government borrowing initiative. I am certain, because it was in the December Welsh Government budget, that there was a quantum sum of £5 million worth of revenue to buy X million pounds worth of capital, to be expected to be spent only on highways. I don't know the final figure. I don't know our final application. It will come with terms and conditions to spend it on highways, and I therefore treat that one as a technical adjustment. I'm going to get a revenue grant, probably specific grant year 1, revenue support grant in year 2, which will provide a sum of revenue money to enable an additional sum of capital borrowing. And it seems to me perfectly reasonable to mix and interplay the revenue settlement and that bit of capital, because it is a technical figure. If I'd known the number, I'd have put it in now. It's effectively a capital technical adjustment, which we always do by routine on revenue. And I think it's important that one goes in. The reason I'm emphasising these is you have to have a set of balance papers that goes to council, and you've got no other mechanism for making recommendations or amendments. So I'm saying I'm looking for permission to technically change all the technical minor things that always happen outside of settlement, technically change anything that comes clearly defined in revenue or capital that says it may only be used for this purpose. And then the third one is probably where the bigger sum of money may be, where there will be policy decisions to be made and debate by all parties. But my final advice on that one is not all authorities are different. You have all taken differing views as to the level of council tax that you are comfortable with, and you have made assumptions over draws from reserves and everything else. And I would just urge all political parties, when it comes to decision and discussion in the council chamber, that you don't fall into a political trap of just being incrementalist about it and saying, oh, because this extra slug of money has come up, we'll spend it on X, Y, and Z, which may be reserves or council tax or capital, or cut some savings or add some more growth in. It's policy decision for yourselves, of course. But I've given you some warnings that you've already stretched me to the limit, and I think I've already done some of the things. Some of them you may have already anticipated some of the support that's coming. So if it's general money, it's up for debate. If it's you must put additional money into service X, Y, and Z, but Swansea Council's already done it in the working papers already, I think it is legitimate for you to take further technical officer advice as to what would be appropriate. But of course, I may not in any way, shape, or form fetter any policy decisions that you may wish to bring forward, or any opposition group may wish to bring forward. So long technical advice, but it's important, I think, this year more than ever, just because we've got some crazy timings. And the very, very, very final one is because you'll be then thinking, well, why can't we have another special cabinet to make all the decisions and recommend them? None of this is due to go through the Senate until the 4th of March. That's when it becomes firm. Amendments to the budget are required by 10 a.m. on the 5th of March. And the advantage of that is it then at least means that in council on the 6th of March, which means I may be in my full Wizard of Oz routine of having to change things on the night, yet again, you are making decisions certain in council once the budget has been set. I would have preferred it went in a better sequencing, but hey, I've got to work with what I've got to work with. So apologies for a very long and laboured technical set of advice, which merges technical officer advice and trying to give you a steer on some of the bits that are clearly, of course, policy is all yours and the other parties to debate, but I may give some further technical advice. I'll hand back to yourself to digest that and tell me what you think of that lot in terms of advice and recognising the challenges you have.
Yeah, Councillor, is it a question? Because I haven't introduced the report yet. Did you want to ask? Declaration of it. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, member of the Swansea Bay Port Health Authority, which was a recipient of such a wonderful tribute by Mr. Smith.
Okay, note that one.
Well, that's exactly the same member that Port Health Authority.
Okay.
But for the avoidance that I'm not declaring an interest because I have no powers or influence over them. I'm merely a servant of the Port Health Authority. So that's why I'm not declaring. I make no decisions, but I couldn't resist just getting it in. They've done quite well, in my view.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith, for that run through of the technical advice. Always very helpful for us to hear. I absolutely concur with the requests you have made of us in terms of the difficulties of timing with the budget and the need for you to be able to make technical adjustments to the budget in reflection of what may be announced this afternoon. One final one I think we just need to add in there, though, is that the final bit on policy in terms of how the local government borrowing initiative manifests itself in any announcement this afternoon, that needs to be in discussion with myself as the representative cabinet, because it would be appropriate, had the timing been different, that would have been discussed at cabinet first. So I think it's only appropriate that we have that discussion early on. And in terms of what you said today, I think just to highlight where cabinet's mind, I think, is on this. Given that it is a Welsh Government announcement which is there to see additional investment in highways, that's what we believe it has been set up to do. We note the point about additionality going in from this authority. That at the moment, we will take advice, but we do want to see the aims of the Welsh Government being reflected in our policy decisions here, because the Welsh Government is taking this initiative in order to improve roads across Wales. If we didn't add some additionality on top of what we were already planning, that would cut across that policy. And I think to capture it, we'd want to do as much as we can as soon as we can. And I'm sure you'll understand that approach from us. So that is one of the ones, I think, just in terms of, I don't intend making any amendment to the report because it's advice we've received, but I would like that captured as a minute in the as a note in the minutes, please, that is Cabinet's view of LGB local government borrowing initiative, and we will take further advice from Mr. Smith in due course in terms of how we achieve that. But can I just ask just Cabinet to confirm that they're happy with that being captured? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Smith, sorry, bring you back in.
No, I was only going to say you're absolutely right, Leader. The reality is I don't expect the parameters of the LGBI to be totally specific on timing. So there's a policy choice there, and there clearly is a policy choice as to what you've done early, as to totality or additionality. But I do expect it to come with clear conditions that they're looking for additionality. So I think you're right. We will have to have a discussion on that one because it's not as simple as revenue. As you know, revenue is a one-year deal, so it goes in for 1 year. I expect this to cover more than 1 year, and I will give technical officer advice to reflect what your Cabinet's will is, and undoubtedly the Welsh Government's intention, which is as much as soon as possible. Undoubtedly, that is quite clear and perfectly reasonable, and is one that I will deal with in conjunction with yourself as a technical adjustment, because it was announced in the budget in December. It's just I can't put it in at the moment. It's just an odd one that would be multiple years and straddle capital but be financed through revenue. But I think that modification is absolutely right and proper, and I didn't mean in any way to imply that I was going to tell you what you could do on that one, because I think that one is multivariate and right that it does have a policy angle that should be discussed, but it's different to any other quantums on the revenue, which is a wider policy debate, whereas this one's going to come with some fairly strong parameters but some local flexibility. So I agree entirely with what you've said, Leader.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Smith. So just in terms of introducing the budget, I won't go through every element of detail because I've had quite a debate with members of the public on it. So some of the points that I was intending to make in the introduction of the report I have made, but just to repeat some important points. This is a record amount of investment into services in Swansea. There has never been a budget that has invested as much money as we are proposing to invest today, £584 million, and a record amount going into every equivalent for every household of £5,400 being committed. In addition, that includes record amounts going into education in the schools of 229 million. Myself and Councillor Smith met with heads earlier this year to talk about the potential for that investment. As has been alluded to, we took the decision as an administration to fix some of the challenges that schools were facing last year by exhausting one of our reserves and by providing additional energy help. That helped schools avoid a very difficult year last year. That money was to drop out this year. So schools were planning on the basis of losing that money. As it's come to pass now, we're able to not only lock that money in to repeat it, but also add a further 11.8 million on top, bringing the total to schools of 22.3 million. So a really important investment there. As Mr. Smith said, it doesn't fix all of the problems. And again, I would say in terms of head teachers and the way in which the schools have responded, I want to put on record my thanks to the schools for the work that they're doing. We acknowledge absolutely. Apologies a second. apologies, just a slight technical issue there. Yes, place on record my thanks to heads and to schools for the work that they've been doing. We fully recognise that this investment does not fix every problem facing schools, as the settlement we've had doesn't fix every problem facing the council. We also recognise that the reserves that schools hold are not equally spread across the school's estate, and some schools will face different challenges to others. So again, very, very grateful for the continued engagement with schools and the work that all of our teaching staff and teaching assistants do to help our young people. And hopefully the money that we've been able to invest this year will help greatly with their aims of doing so. Likewise, in social care, huge pressures being faced across Wales for social care. We've seen an uplift of over 20% in terms of pressures coming to our front door for people seeking social care services. And that is why, for the reasons Mr. Smith outlined, but also for the fact that we need to address those pressures, we're proposing an extra £25.4 million going into social care, again, taking it to a record investment of £196 million. That is, I think that is both an in-year rise record as well as a total services investment record for social care. So again, these are extraordinary amounts going into our services, and Mr. Smith referred to 52 million overall going into services, even accounting for any changes, savings or other things that change within the budget. Outside of that, which I'll come on to, there are proposals that we have for capital, which we'll talk about, and they continue to be very ambitious plans for capital. But in terms of where we've ended up, so in terms of the people living in Swansea, it's easy just to look at your own patch and not look around you. As I alluded to, we remain in the bottom part of the table for the increase in council tax, and that's where we think we'll end up again this year. So we are raising council tax by less than others are raising council tax. The majority of others are raising council tax by more. And that rise includes the money we have to pass on to the fire service for the levy. So again, the headline rate is not the rate that we retain as a council. It's much, much closer to 5%. That's the equivalent of around £1.40 a week on a Band B property. As I alluded to in the answer to the questions from the public, if you look over the border to Plaid, Cymru, Rhondda, Carmarthenshire, you will see them proposing a 9.7% rise in council tax. If you look the other way to the independent-led council in Neath Talbot, they're asking for 7%. And we must remember that Neath Talbot is already charging its residents over £200 a year more than we ask our residents for every year. So again, on any measure, we have tried to strike the fairest balance we can for the taxpayers of Swansea. It's not easy sometimes for people to realise what is being charged and what is being delivered elsewhere. But I have to say, I think this budget is one that we should be very proud of taking forward as an administration. So with that, I'll pause there and open it up for any comments or contributions, but happy to move the report. Could I ask for a seconder first, please?
Yeah, more than happy to second. But what I would like to do, Leader, is put my thanks on record to yourself for the lobbying, continuing lobby that you do with not just Welsh Government, but national government. It's very successful for many years, but this year, my God, you've done extremely well. So firstly, I'd like to put my record on thanks to you, but when you look back, I think we've been planning for this budget since probably middle of September now, when we've been preparing for the worst, and we got in a far better picture than what we were hoping for. So well done to all the senior management team, cabinet members. Most importantly, the way that all trade unions have engaged with us, education trade unions and our central service trade unions have engaged, in this budget as well. So I really would like to thank you for that as well, Leader. So more than happy to second.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hopkins. And again, Mr. Smith and I do a regular tag team of making sure that we use all of the levers available to us, both corporately and politically, to try and get the best deal for local government and the best deal for Swansea. But thank you very much for recognising the efforts. Councillor Francis Davies.
Yeah, it's great to see the amount of money and extra money that we're putting into our budget this year. And I didn't recognise the words earlier that when Mr. Thraves turned up to question that we cuts upon cuts, but we not be spending £50 million more. But I'd also like to put on record my thanks to the treasurer or the Section 151 officer for the way that he explains finance to everybody. It is not the easiest to understand, but he makes it sound simple, and it's really appreciate the work that he puts in the team. But also to you, leader, that I've never met a leader who has had the grasp of the portfolio of finance as well as anybody that like yourself. And I think that's really important when one's leading a council and a cabinet, that unless we've got the grips on the finance, we can't work effectively. And I think by you leadership on this, we've got the grasp and the understanding. You are continually driving us forward. As Councillor David Hopkins said, we've been for months looking at budgets and how we make sure that we use them most effectively and efficiently for the people of Swansea. So again, thank you, Leader, and to Ben Smith. And it is a real team effort, record amounts of money going in, and every one of us, our portfolio holders, really want to see that money spent wisely, and I'm sure we will.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Francis Davies. And again, I do appreciate the words, but again, I'm advised very well by Mr. Smith and his team, and they do an immense amount of work. My job is to be difficult and challenging, and to make sure I get all of the money I possibly can from our treasury to make sure that we can invest it in services. And you know, that is part of the job of the politician. But thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. And again, thanks to all of the cabinet and the directors for the work they're doing to make sure that we deliver on the promises we've made. Councillor Robert Smith.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd like to echo what you said earlier in terms of the school's delegated budget in particular. We knew last year when the impact that the 11.5 million that was put in had, and that the fact that that is baseline this year is going to make a big difference, as well as the extra 11.8 million. And as you said, it doesn't mean that every issue facing every school is fixed, but this will go a long way to avoiding the kind of disaster scenario that many governing bodies were facing less than 3 months ago. As I said, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. The demands that society is making on schools, the issues they are picking up, they are increasing every day. But I think it goes a long way to meeting the current pressures. And we need to work with Welsh Government to look at continuing settlements like this to enable schools to move forward, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. Absolutely agree. One thing I wanted to do on this report, again, I don't want to move an amendment to this other than the technical amendments Mr. Smith has alluded to, but contained within the papers are some funding which will go to help stabilise our waste collection services. We know that we've been in recent months experiencing some challenges with the regularity of waste collections. It is something that we are in discussions with the unions and the workforce to resolve, and are making some really good progress on that. In last year's budget, we alluded to the fact that there was heavy capital investment in new kit to deal with reliability issues within our fleet of vehicles, and that has been now achieved. But within this, there are further measures, just to highlight, there are further measures that we are taking to increase the workforce within the waste services, so that we can bring further resilience to that service in areas that need it. Again, I'm not putting a figure on that, and I'm not putting any other constraints on it, but I do think it's important that we note that today, because it's not clear in the papers, but it is there within the funding arrangements, that we are anticipating a further increase in the workforce that work every day of the week to collect our refuse and do an excellent job on the whole in terms of the work that they do, often in very, very difficult conditions. So again, my thanks go to Councillor Anderson and Councillor Hopkins in terms of the work we've been doing to try and ensure the changes in working practices that have been a challenge have been embedded as quickly as possible. And again, we believe that some additional resources deployed in the right way can help us get to the point that we've been trying to get to for a few weeks now, which is making sure that we collect people's refuse on the day that the resident expects. And that is the aim of what we're intending to do. So again, just if we can capture that as a short minute in the papers, that is the intention contained within the papers. Okay. Other than that, if there aren't any further comments, could I ask you all to show if you're in favour of the report with the advice from Mr. Smith? Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. We'll move now then to our next report. Let me just find the page. Yep. And that's the capital budget and programme for 24 to 29/30. Mr. Smith again, please.
Thank you, Leader. Another big budget decision in terms of papers. We had a couple of fallow years, didn't we, where we only had a capital programme of just about 400 million rolling, back above the £500 million mark for general fund this time round. It includes some indicative sums for some of the later stuff around sustainable communities for learning. It includes the items you've agreed in year which are subject to deferred borrowing, etc., etc. But my technical advice is set out effectively in the report, which is asked you to approve under recommendation 1 the whole £500 million plus, and how I'm assuming it's funded, including that deferral strategy. And making decisions on a case-by-case basis. I have some good news for you. I draw your attention to the second one, which is that you consider where to allocate the additional funding. There was an additional sum of money in the provisional settlement. There was an additional sum of money of £1.395 million. So you are invited, as the report is written, to decide what to do with that. I have canvassed around for things that are in my list of things that have been mentioned. It's for you to decide, but I am aware you may be interested in the Community Investment Fund. You may be interested in a raft of items that have been waiting for a number of years for funding for parks machinery, where the principle of it is supported by members and officers, but it's subject to finding a pot of money. So my advice would be that you maybe look to allocate £395,000 towards that parks machinery on a rolling basis. So that's each year for each of the next 4 or so years in the capital programme, which would broadly match the FPR7 ask. And that then gives you a decision what to do with £1 million. Because I'm a treasurer at the moment, I've parked it all in contingency instead of put it in my jam jar. But it is your choice to make here, and that would then be reflected in changes at council. And then I've also said that this is the one that's got to have a third amendment, which is links to the revenue one, which is you're recognising, subject to you and I having that discussion about what the LBGI thing announces today, which will necessarily result in an additional technical add to this report and the matching revenue financing for it in the revenue report. So that one will be also added under technical advice, but in discussion with the leader and myself. But you have a decision to make on the second one. You can leave it all in Bank of Benland's jam jar, or you can choose to allocate it as you see fit. I leave it entirely up to your good selves. I've just given you some examples. You may have others that you have in your mind, Leader.
No, thank you, Mr. Smith. And I'll start with the LGBI first. So again, just to say thank you for the advice on that. And again, once we know the quantum and the detail around that scheme in this afternoon's Welsh Government announcements, obviously we'll revisit that with the aim of trying to get as much impact as we can as soon as we can. In terms of the 1.395 million, having discussed with Cabinet colleagues, the Community Investment Fund has been hugely successful. And again, I want to place on record my thanks to Councillor Francis Davis and Councillor Andrew Stevens, who have worked to ensure not only the money that we make available is delivered into communities, but that they secure significant amounts of match funding and other funding which can be drawn in to make the scheme's impact even bigger. And I know that all ward members have provided or been encouraged to provide schemes for their communities to take advantage of that scheme. However, there are cost pressures within those proposals, as there are on the very big projects. So again, to make sure that the needs of communities can be met, in discussion with Cabinet, our view is that the £1 million should be added to the Community Investment Fund as a top-up for this year to allow further schemes to be delivered and for the schemes that are in progress to be able to be delivered without facing financial constraint. On the 3.95 million, yes, you're absolutely right. Again, that is something that we've discussed as a cabinet, and there has been a further call, as we know, in terms of the amount of active travel routes that have been delivered, the amount of areas that our teams have to look after. That requires regular investment in machinery, and therefore the view from Cabinet is that 395k that is residual be invested in to allow for investment in further machinery on a rolling basis. So, Mr. Smith, those would be the amendments, which should then exhaust the headroom that you've alluded to today.
So if I could come back in with just one more bit of technical advice, the 395k is understood, and that is in the base for each year of the programme, because that 1.395 million is available in the base as additional capital. You've indicated in your advisement that you wanted to put an additional £1 million into the Community Investment Fund for this coming year. That still then leaves £1 million in each of the following years. So again, at this stage, given its future years, you might wish to leave it in contingency to allocate in due course, or have due regard to other things, building maintenance. I'm sure there are other things. I'm just using one as an example. Yeah. But at this point in time, I just wanted to make sure that when you come to what you've passed for me to reflect in the final papers to council, that £1 million, is it to be allocated each year to Community Investment Fund? I heard it to be 1 year, but I'll just take advisement on that. Well, otherwise, you've got further years of £1 million to do. The Bank of Benland knows no end of giving technical advice to you as to what to spend it on.
Yeah. So for today's session, we intend to make it for the first year, but we are grateful of the acknowledgement that it is a recurring fund for at least 2 years, and therefore, at this present time, until we know the call and the nature of the headroom that is required in that fund, it's a 1 year, £1 million, with the rest remaining residual for time being. Okay. Any comments or questions from any Cabinet members today on this item? No. With that, then I'll formally move the report, which, as Mr. Smith said, takes us back over the £500 million again. It contains both big and small schemes, a huge ambition for continued investment in our schools estate, and delivers on the priorities that we've outlined in previous council and cabinet sessions to deliver major schemes across our city, including the digital villages, the Swansea Lower Valley, and building on the deliveries that we've made in terms of Palace Theatre, the Arena, etc. So again, we know that there are a number of schemes due to complete this year, including Astorfa, where the new library and archives will be created. We begin work shortly on Castle Square Gardens. We have River Corridor commitments to deliver, as well as the new public sector hub, the new hotel, the potential for the new civic centre development. We have an arrangement with the Ospreys, which we are seeking to see delivered, for a new stadium at St Helens. All of these are transformational schemes that will help our city progress. So again, it is a very, very big capital programme, but it's right that we deliver on what the people of Swansea have asked us to do. And that requires us to be as efficient and effective as possible with our own resources, but always chasing those extra pots that may appear with Welsh or UK government. And that's what we've been successful in doing. And I know, again, put on record my thanks to Paul Relf and his team for the work that they've done in ensuring that we achieve a really good share of government pots that may be available. So with that, I'll happily move the Cabinet budget and programme report, and look for colleagues for a seconder, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Are we all happy to agree the report with their suggested amendments? Okay, thank you very much. That is carried. Moving on then to agenda item 12, which is the housing revenue account revenue budget, and I'll call in Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. I don't know if Mr. Smith has got any comments before I introduce the report.
Yeah, no problem. I'll bring Mr. Smith in for advice first.
Thank you, Councillor. So I will be very brief, but then defer to yourself. You will make clear that there is a social rent limit, which limits the ability for the HRA to raise monies. But but the one that I would give technical advice on is you will see, as did scrutiny, that there is quite an addition proposed, I hope temporarily, to HRA reserve balances. There are some risks facing all HRA stock holding authorities and other registered social landlords. And so the reason in the background in terms of my not issuing any Section 25 statements on this, because the same rules apply to the HRA as to general fund, is that I am satisfied that the proposals that you are having in front of you provide sufficiently additions to HRA reserves, which I hope for a temporary period of time, because there are some potential liabilities and risks out there that affect all authorities. If they go away, then my officer advice will be that you'll be able to return to a more normal position. Having said that there is that deviation and disturbance in the force, which is quite obvious in the papers, the reality is you still have a very large revenue contribution to capital when you come on to the next item. That's the only bit of technical advice I would give, because it probably needs to be there in terms of context, because it did come up at scrutiny panel, because they were surprised as to why there was such a swing. But there is a technical, logical, set out and disclosed in the statement of a draft statement of accounts reason why I've advised you to do that. Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Okay, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to Mr Smith for the introduction. So very happy to move the recommendations on page 144, and it's recommended that the budget proposals detailed in section 4 be recommended to Council for approval. Just to highlight a few inflationary pressures, specifically around revenue repairs budget, which has seen significant demands post-COVID, and even though there is more increased investment in revenue repairs, I'm pleased to say that we are working well through that backlog and are seeing light at the end of the tunnel there. However, we do need, as is stated in 2.2, we've established a working group with officers from Housing and Building Services to undertake a comprehensive review just to get under the surface of why those costs have increased so significantly. There has been a slight slippage of £4 million in the revised budget for the capital programme of 53 million. And so that has resulted in reduced borrowing costs. And it should be noted that the rental income only increased by 2.7% in line with Welsh Government's rental cap. However, our business case was predicated on expecting at least 5%. So we've had less rental income than we did plan for, and we've adjusted accordingly. Just to highlight obviously the section 4.1.5, the main changes are stated there from the 24-25 budget very clearly. I won't go into those in great detail as the report has been received by Cabinet. And the risks and uncertainties, just to highlight, the Welsh Housing Quality Standard 2023 will require some significant investment, around potentially £900 million. And at the same time, we're obviously dealing with homelessness pressures. So, you know, we do have to prioritise. And I know homelessness pressures are the top priority. But we are in discussion with Welsh Government officials in terms of if there is any money available to go towards us reaching that standard, we'll happily receive that and improve our properties even further following the £500 million investment that we've already placed in council tenants' homes with the Welsh Housing Quality Standard Round 1. And as Mr Smith has referenced as well, the HRA predicated reserves balance at the start of the year will be 17 million. And that has been adjusted, as you can see in Table B, to 22.352 million. So Table A summarises the HRA revenue budget for 24-25 to 25-26, and the movement in reserves is stated clearly in Table B. So very happy to move the report and happy to take any questions, Leader.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Lewis, and thank you for moving the report. Happy to formally second. And again, I think fully concur with Mr Smith's advice in terms of the temporary bolstering of reserves whilst we deal with some of the issues which are affecting stockholding authorities across Wales. So absolutely agree with the proposed approach. I'll pause there and open it up for questions, comments from any members. If not, the report's been moved and seconded. Can I ask you, show if you're in favour? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. We'll move then to the next one, which is the Housing Revenue Account Capital Budget and Programme 24 to 29. Mr. Smith, technical advice first.
Nice and simple, this one. I'll defer to Councillor Lewis, but for the avoidance of doubt, this is not quite as big as the general funds, but here we go again, another over £250 million, impressively large HRA programme, underpinned by much of what you've just discussed and passed on the still significant revenue contributions to supporting the capital aspirations. It's the only technical advice I need to give on this one. Thank you, Chair. Leader.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. So very, very happy to move the recommendations on page 115, which I won't read through them in their entirety. This is the most significant capital investment programme that we have ever placed. So £219 million to be invested over the next 4 years. Some really exciting opportunities in this capital programme, the likes that we have never seen before as a council. So for the first time, we will be purchasing Section 106 homes with the Persimmon Garden Village development. So 141 homes, and in line with the planning permission obligations, 70 of those will be council homes and 71 of those will be low-cost home ownership homes, which will be targeted at first-time buyers. This is the first time as a council that we've ever done this, so extremely excited about that. We're also going to place significant investment in acquisitions, buying back ex-council right to buy properties, and that's been really successful as a programme to date. So I'm really pleased that we're continuing significant investment in this area. And we're also significantly investing in our high-rise blocks, specifically Croft Street and Griffith John Street, and we'll continue to make refurbishments and upgrades to properties in Tudno Place and Hill Emrys in Penderry Ward. And finally, really pleased that we are looking at bringing forward a package deal where we have a direct build option with a private developer, and we are in the process of dealing with the detail of that to see how we can take that forward. And that'll be a turnkey solution where at the end of the site, as it's developed, we will purchase those properties and turn them into council homes. So significant investment. I'm really pleased that we're continuing to invest 57.3 million over the next 4 years in more homes, but that we also continue, as you can see in the appendices, to significantly invest in the improvement of our existing council homes, which is to the benefit of our council tenants. So delighted to move the report, and again, happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Lewis. Very happy to second, and again, concur with your words around this is a significantly record-breaking proposal for the next 4 years. I think over the last 10 years, we've invested around £500 million. So again, it's of a scale larger, and again, should some of the concerns that we referenced in the revenue report abate, then again, the intention would be to add further to this programme in year if we're able to do so. So again, the ambition to deliver more homes to people of Swansea, reduce those lists where people are waiting for new or improved homes, and to make sure that we deliver on our promises to bring better homes to Swansea. So absolutely right. Very happy to second. Open it up to questions or comments. Councillor Francis Davis.
I want to congratulate the cabinet member on the amount of investment going into for our tenants in Swansea and future tenants. One huge investment, you know, I've never known such an investment going into our council housing. But, you know, it's the jobs that would create as well, you know, and that will help the economy in Swansea and employment. So well done.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for that. With that then, it's been moved, seconded. We'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Okay, thank you, colleagues. That's carried. That concludes our budget paper items. And again, can I place on record my thanks to Mr. Smith and his team. I know they've been working incredibly long hours to bring all of those sets of papers together. It's been a mammoth task. It ain't finished yet because he's got to start it all again this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing Mr. Smith and at council on the 6th. So thank you very much from us for the work that's been done.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Cabinet. I'm sure my colleagues who work incredibly hard on my behalf will be equally grateful for those kind words. So thank you.
No problem. Okay, we'll move then to item 15, which is the report of Cabinet Member Education on the capital programme authorisation for a 2G facility. At 14, have I skipped an item? Apologies. Apologies. Sustainable Communities for Learning. I was eager to get on with the agenda. Sustainable Communities for Learning, maintenance funding 24-25. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Leader. And I think this was discussed earlier on. And I want to repeat my tribute to our officers and the schools that they're working with for the dexterity and skill that they've shown in being able to get this money committed and spent by the deadline of the 31st of March. When, as I said, it was challenging when the money came through in July. It was even more challenging to be told at the beginning of January that there was extra funding on its way. Welcome though it is, it had to be spent by the end of March. So happy to move the report. And I'm, as I said, glad to see that we will be seeing further investment in our school estate as a result, on a number of projects as a result of this additional funding.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Absolutely concur and very happy to second the report. Open it out for questions or comments. If not, colleagues, could I ask if you could show if you're in favour of the report, please? Thank you very much. That is carried again. Moving on to agenda item 15 this time, which is the capital programme authorisation of the 2G facility at Ysgol Gyfun Gymraeg Bryntawy. Councillor Smith.
Again, great pleasure to move this as a significant investment in the facilities at Bryntawy, and I welcome the investment that we're able to make and the support from Welsh Government, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Very happy to second, and again, welcome the £1.2 million that's being committed into better facilities at this school. And again, it just adds to that significant investment we're making across our parks, our schools, to give children the best play and sports facilities we possibly can. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, I welcome this report. We've been waiting a long time for this investment to Ysgol Gyfun Gymraeg Bryntawy, and it is going to be a fantastic facility, not just for the school, but for the community. There is a community leisure centre in Penlan there, and this will become another further asset for that. You know, there's the primary school, there's the secondary school, and the community at large, alongside Mynydd Newydd playing fields. This will be first class for the community of Penlan and surrounding areas, because on top of that, we've seen investment in the changing rooms at Penlan, at Mynydd Newydd. There's going to be future investment in the play area and the sports park there. So it's going to be a really good hub for that community. So well done all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Francis Davis. Yeah, absolutely concur. Are there any other comments or questions on this one? If not, then the recommendations are there on page 191. Could I ask colleagues to show if they're in favour of the report, please? Thank you very much. That is carried. Item 16 is withdrawn as per the advice earlier. So we move to item 17, which is the business rates temporary rate relief scheme for the coming year. Mr. Smith, technical advice, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just when you thought you got rid of me, back he comes again with the last item. 2 recommendations in front of you, straightforward. There is a national scheme underpinned by Welsh Government, but if you want to do it locally, you've got to adopt it locally. So that's the reason for recommendation 1 and therefore recommendation 2. In terms of usual advice, it is a 40% discount for all qualifying properties. Come and get it whilst you can get it, please, because it's very helpful, very useful. I am only slightly jesting because this time round, as set out in the report, for 25-26, people have got to reapply. So if there is any, we will do our marketing out to all usual suspects. If the press do report on this item in any way, shape or form, it'd be jolly handy if they do equally emphasise to businesses they do have to apply this year. I'd rather people apply and get money that they are entitled to help reduce the burden on the high streets. That's the only special plea I make in terms of the technicals. You'll recall in previous years we've done it automatically. We're not allowed to do that this year. This is, I think, the 8th year of a temporary relief scheme. The amounts have varied, but it is still jolly useful. And I just draw your attention to the value of it right at the end, which is, I anticipate I will get just under £7.8 million from the Welsh Government to run this scheme. And I always do it at slight risk that the amount I get back may be more or slightly less than that. In previous years, you've always taken my advice that that is a risk worth taking to maximise any discretions I've got available to give relief to any eligible property. So this time round, still a big slug of money. It's a 40% rate, same as last year, but people must apply. Businesses must apply. I'm sure we'll put some active comms out on that. And if there's any general media coverage, it would be very useful for them to also emphasise people apply. Because if they don't, and they forget for the year, they can get some backdating, but it can't be retro applied for the whole of the previous year. So please, 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 if anyone is interested or reads about it, that they do make sure they get their applications in, and my team will process it accordingly. So those are the two recommendations. You get it every year because it's a temporary scheme. You have to reapply it, but who wouldn't want to adopt £7.8 million worth of relief for the high street? And I'm prepared to take the risk at the margin if we don't get fully reimbursed by Welsh Government. That's all, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith, and absolutely right to remind people of the change this year in terms of their having to apply. I'm sure our comms teams will be doing a really good job to get that message out, and hopefully the local businesses, the businesses that qualify, will put their applications in and receive the help that is available to them, because £7.8 million is a substantial sum of money to help businesses across Swansea. So very happy to move that report. Look for a seconder. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, love the second, and I'm really pleased that this is going to help out the businesses in the city and county Swansea. Once again, £7.8 million is a lot of money. And businesses have been under a lot of pressure, city centres and district centres. And this will be well received, I know, by those people. There will be some confusion of having to apply for it again. So I would urge everybody, as Mr. Smith has said, to inform everybody to get their applications in and get them in early, because this 40% will make a lot of people, a lot of businesses successful or not.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. Move then out to any questions on this report. If not, could I ask colleagues to show if they're in favour of the recommendations on page 218 of the report? Thank you very much. That is carried. We move then to agenda item 19, which is 18. Apologies, I've skipped one again. Which is the Financial Procedure Rule 7, the Active Travel Fund 24-25 variation. Over to Councillor Stevens.
Okay, thanks, Leader. I'm pleased to report this, to bring this report to Cabinet for Cabinet approval. This confirms the reallocation of the active travel grant funding following the decision to pause the city centre links scheme on Walters and Sketty Road. We've worked closely with Welsh Government and Transport for Wales to ensure the funding remains in Swansea and is redirected towards other priority active travel projects. So as I've said before, we are committed to delivering an ambitious active travel programme that enhances connectivity and provides safe, sustainable transport across the city. We already boast over 120 kilometres of active travel routes, and this funding variation will support further expansion, ensuring that we continue to improve walking and cycling infrastructure for residents and visitors alike. We're committed to improving our active travel network, but it is also important that we get it right. This means ensuring projects work for residents, businesses, and the wider community, both during and after their implementation. Walter Road remains part of the Welsh Government Active Travel Network map that was consulted on in 2021. And moving forward, it will have to be considered alongside other schemes that we do at the start of each bidding year, ensuring we prioritise projects that deliver the best outcomes for Swansea. And Leader, we also need to consider our broader transport planning, including work on the Swansea Bay and regional metro and regional transport connectivity. So the report outlines that the allocation that we're looking to reallocate funding into Lochagowerton. So depending on the cycling and walking infrastructure around National Cycle Network 4, as well as enhancements in Clyne Valley, improving the well-used NCN4 route further again throughout Clyne Valley. It also is seeking to reallocate funding to the NCN 43 to the Riverside link, which will upgrade the path connecting Brunel Way to the Lando Park and Ride and the proposed Skyline attraction, as well as further co-active travel improvements, supporting feasibility studies, infrastructure improvements and education initiatives to promote walking and cycling. So by retaining and redirecting these funds within Swansea, we ensure that investment continues to benefit our communities, improve connectivity and encourage more people to adopt active travel as a viable transport option. This is a positive outcome for Swansea and does reinforce our commitment to a greener, healthier and accessible city. So I do want to take this opportunity, Chair, to thank the team and you, Leader, for the efforts in securing this reallocation at the 11th hour, and a special thanks to Chloe Lewis for the very quick turnaround in preparing this report. So if there are any other comments, I'm happy to move the report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. Very happy to second and again concur with your views in terms of the work that's been done to secure this funding. I think just in terms of making sure that people understand what is happening here, there were some real challenges to technically deliver the scheme in Sketty Road and Walters Road due to the potential impacts it would have on businesses and residences and commuter traffic during its implementation. We've taken, I think, the right decision to look again at that and see how best we can complete the network, but the aim still remains to complete the network, and that hasn't changed. And again, from what you said, I place on record my thanks for the work that you've done, but also the way in which the Cabinet Secretary, Ken Skates, has looked at this matter and the pragmatic decision made by Welsh Government to allow us to vary the funding into other active travel routes so that we can move the network forward. So I think overall excellent outcome, and I think will allow us to continue the improvements to active travel across our county. So thank you very much for that, and again, happy to second. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, I'm glad that this money has been kept and that we will now reallocate it in the areas of Swansea. When I look at the river corridor, you know, it's getting better all the time in that area. You know, hopefully we see Skyline coming on in the vicinity of the river corridor way. We've seen Penderyn coming and the buildings being regenerated. But it's not just about people getting to work as well, which is the main for active travel, but it's the amount of tourists that now come to Swansea for walking and for cycling, because Swansea is probably taking up most of this. I think we lead in the way in active travel in Wales, and that's down to the Cabinet member and our officers in making sure that we push ahead with these active travel routes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Francis Davis. Yes, again, these are going to be really important routes for future development of our city. So really important that we get that right. With that then, the report has been moved and seconded. Put it out to the vote. Can I ask all of you to show if you're in favour of the recommendations, please? Thank you very much. Again, that is carried. And that brings us then to our last item, which is local authority governor appointments. Councillor Lewis, we'll let you go because you've got a declared interest.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And I'll hand over to Councillor Smith.
And me again, happy to move the report and thank those who volunteered their services for this important and onerous role.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Very happy to second the report and again concur with your comments. Are there any other comments on this report? If not, could I ask you all to show if you're in favour, please? Thank you colleagues, that again is carried. And with that, we come to the end of the meeting. Can I thank you all very much for your attendance? Great to see the budget being progressed today, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.
See you all later.
Thank you.